begin. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for today. I thank you so much for the precious time that we can spend together, Lord. It's a privilege. And I pray as such, regardless of how we came here and what we expect from this place and from these moments together, that you can speak to our hearts and our minds, Lord. And wherever we are in our journey with you, whether we're close or perhaps we're struggling, Lord, you know our heart. You know where we are at. Father, let it be that you can speak through your Spirit, and that it will all be in a spirit of love and acceptance, knowing that you first of all accepted us, Lord, because you loved us so much. Thank you so much for each and single person here in the room. Also for those that today couldn't make it. I think of Theodora and Michelle and Janis, Lord. Father God, we pray that as a group, Lord, we can get to know each other much better, Lord, and that you will get all the glory for it. We pray as such for this beautiful project, but we know that this is not just something we come up with, Lord. It's something that was first of all birthed in your heart. So we pray all your blessings upon it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So remember, streams. What is the first part?
Story.
I will tell my story. And a lot of you actually know my story already, so I'm going to give a short version. But I think Jude and Beryl, there are two of them. I don't want to highlight all the time because don't feel that, please. But they might not know my story that well. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, you know that. And I wasn't born and raised in a Christian home. As a matter of fact, my parents, the only time they saw the church when we would go to France in the summer just to see a couple of beautiful cathedrals. But I would never ever go to a church building because my parents, and particularly my dad, for a very long time said, like, you know, church is for people that need help, that need a crutch or something. And I was born and raised in that setting where people, you know, in a small village, quite a Christian village, and my parents particularly, they were always a bit upset with Christians because, and my father particularly said, like, you know, they say one thing but they do another thing. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So I was raised in that environment. But I still went to a Christian school, primary school and even high school. For the funny reason that my parents, and again, my father said, like, you know, I don't believe in the God and stuff, but they do have good morals. And I was a bit confused about, like, yeah, you don't believe in God, but you sent me to a Christian school. Doesn't make sense. All right, I'm going to the Christian school. Heard all the stories from the Old Testament. David and Goliath and, you know, all those stories. And I thought they were beautiful. Like, wow, amazing stories. But they really didn't connect with me whatsoever. I thought they were just beautiful stories. And that was all there is to it. But then, a little bit later on in life, I became a teenager. And you know when you're a teenager and you're struggling with identity, with figuring out who you are, in Holland, which is an extremely liberal country, I was really trying to figure out, who am I? Who am I really? I mean, okay, I don't believe in God. I really didn't believe in God. I couldn't make sense of it. But I didn't know what I did believe in. It was difficult for me to understand. I had friends, some of them were Christians, and they were talking about church and didn't really make sense of what they were saying. Others, they were not Christian, and they sometimes invited me to all kind of places that you as a parent wish that your kid would not go to, like to a nice coffee shop, and it wasn't for the coffee. And when I was about 14, 15, 16 year old, I was in that environment, and I felt empty from the inside, but that's what it was. I saw my friends doing the same stuff, and it was okay with me. At the same time, at home, due to different circumstances, my parents were clashing so much with one another that at the age of 16, I decided to run away from home. Talking to Mason about something we have in common, like, you know, I don't want anything to do with home. Because I couldn't stand the fights anymore. It's like, you know what, I'm done with this. And I started to live for a time being with my older brother. He's 7 years older. He already moved out of the house, and he was living in a big city. Not too far from my parents' home, and I stayed there for some time. I tried to figure out life still. I stayed for some time with him, but then after a while, my brother said, like, "Listen, I cannot take care of you. You need to go back to your, you know, to mom and dad." And I reluctantly said, like, "Okay, I'll go back." And it would only take a few months before obviously we started to clash again, and I already started wondering, like, I think I want to get out of this place. I cannot stand this place. And it was particularly in that place where I was struggling with myself and struggling with my environment. There was a friend, his name was Henk. He invited me to a small group of young people. They were all like max 20 years old, not very old. And they were talking about the gospel, the good news. I had never ever heard of the gospel. Like, it's one of those words I don't use. And when I use the word God, it was usually in a cuss word, because I was using the name of God in very different context than what they usually use in church. When I heard them talking about the love of God and the plan of salvation, I didn't necessarily understand everything they were saying. I was simply observing the people, and I saw something. It's like, oh my goodness, they have something, and I don't know what it is. And they seem to be so happy, and it made me sometimes a bit upset, because like, why are they so happy? It's annoying me. And it was exactly in that time where at home I was struggling so much with myself, and particularly with my father, that I said, like, you know what, I will give it a shot. I prayed. I didn't know what it meant to pray, but it's like, oh God, if you're real, reveal yourself in some ways. And I started to cry. Now, I'm not a person that cries because, first of all, I'm an introvert. I keep things to myself. I'm extremely reserved. And I grew up in an environment where you, as a man, do not show your emotions. Now, I was by myself. Nobody was seeing it. But as a not crier, I was crying my guts out. I was crying and crying and crying, and I didn't know why. And it was at that moment that I also realized, like, wow, there seems to be a huge weight to simply lift it from my shoulders of an emptiness and a burden that I was carrying myself and trying to figure out who I was and all of that stuff. And I started to walk with the Lord. Now, it didn't mean that it all of a sudden was like I was a happy, clappy Christian, happy going to church and all of that stuff. There were moments I was very happy, but there were also moments that I was still struggling with the question, who am I? I grew older. I got to know Janine. We started dating. Janine is a hugger, a Brazilian, loves the hugs and everything, and I was still the iceberg that's like, you know what? You stay in your place and I stay in my place, and then we're all fine. That was me. That was me. And in our first years of marriage, that was tough for her particularly, because she thought, like, does he love me? Does he like me? I'm not so sure. And the reason why I was distant is because I didn't want to let anyone come in, because the moment you would let anyone come in and it would go wrong. And back then, just before I got to know her, I was in another relationship with someone else that broke up with me. I said, like, this is not going to ever happen again. And I put my wall up. Time went by, and over time we learned, what it meant to come close to each other, to be intimate with each other, not in the way you right now think, but in the sense of, really getting to know each other, be vulnerable to each other. But then Joshua was born. And I had a dad, and I love my dad, but I didn't have any reference whatsoever what it means to be a dad. And I was struggling with that. And this little boy, he would wake up in the middle of the night, and both of us were crying, like, help, what are we doing with the little boy? I have no idea what to do. And by the time he was growing older and older, then also Rebecca came in Brazil, and they were all growing up older and older. And by the time that we're in an age that, you really need to be there as a father, I had zero clue what that meant. It was already difficult to be a husband. It was difficult to relate to me in many ways. And I came into a point, it's like, I don't know how to deal with this. This is so hard for me. And it was in the time in Brazil, particularly, when I loved God, and that wasn't the question or something. Like, I started to do Bible school, and I wanted to work in the church and all of that stuff. That was all in Brazil. But at the same time, I was still walking around with all those questions about myself and who I am and how I'm supposed to relate to this whole concept of father, myself, or see God as a father. I couldn't picture that. It's like, I could see him as a creator or almighty being or something, but as a father, No way. I would be scared of that. It was in that time that I was in ministry and I was counseling people and they would be sharing their stories with me, that their life stories and their struggles became my life struggles as well, because I could recognize a lot of their pain and also in my life. And when you're exposed to that for a lot of times, and pastors are, that starts to do something with your heart. To the point that I got into a crisis with my own emotions and my own feelings and my own identity again, that in Brazil I started to have panic attacks. Now I don't know if you ever had a panic attack. It's the closest thing that you feel to hell, literally. It's like when everything shuts, you cannot rationally think anymore, you start hyperventilating and you start blacking out even in the worst case scenario. There were many times I even thought I had a heart attack or something like that. That's how it feels like. Because I simply could not relate to who I was myself, and it was too hard for me. That was a journey of about 2 to 3 years where God literally said, I'm going to smack you to the floor in a very lovingly, fatherly way. So listen, I'm going to make something new out of you. But whatever you think you are, your construct of who you think you are, that first needs to be dismantled. So I had to take meds. I was still being a pastor. Put up the face. All of that stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you live by appearances and stuff. Pastors are susceptible to that as well. They're a public figure. But I started to realize over time, hey, wait a second. All this stuff with who I am, all of those questions were answered simply by receiving God's love. Because I could understand God's love conceptually, He loves me, but I couldn't receive it as love. I couldn't be embraced by God as love, because there was always this barrier in some ways, because I had a certain idea of God that wasn't even real. Long story short, in the last 3 years, I suppose, and I'm a Christian for 25 years now, it's quite a while already, God started to shift literally everything in my life. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about God, about the Bible, and that kind of stuff, it started to shift in a major way because of one very simple thing, and that is what Mason was saying. When you understand your identity in Jesus Christ, and you can be embraced by God the Father, not just by God whatever, God the Father, it changed everything. And today, I'm standing before you as a very different man, not as a perfect man. I know I have my failures, my kids, my wife can be the first one to tell you. We're not talking about perfection here, but we are talking about purity of heart, and somebody that truly wants to love God with everything he has. And that's my story. I'm standing here. I wrote a lot of the stuff that I went through myself, the deep, darkest days of my life sometimes. The days that I thought of, I'm going to end my life. I don't want to live any longer. Now I look back and say, all that stuff that happened to me, God is now using it for His glory. And that's why I can stand here. So I want to take you to listen to my story, have a little bit of patience with me.